Welcome to the night the sky swallowed a Boeing whole, 239 souls, a modern airliner, gone as if erased from the map of heaven itself. March 8, 2014, Kuala Lumpur International Airport. The air heavy, humid, a night like any other. Flight 370, a gleaming Boeing 777, lifts into the dark toward Beijing, routine, ordinary, until the moment it isn't, until radar screens blink, and the sky goes silent. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact minute you found this story. Because somewhere beyond the clouds and the clock, a flight is still missing, waiting to be heard. It began with a sound that wasn't heard, a silence that should have been impossible in the age of constant transmission. March 8, 2014, 1:19 a.m. local time. A calm voice across the radio waves. Good night, Malaysian 370. And then nothing. No distress call, no signal, no flicker of light on the radar screen. Just a void, in which 239 lives disappeared into the dark above the South China Sea. They called it a singular disappearance, an event without precedent, a fate unknown. In the beginning there was confusion, too much information, too little truth. Families gathered before television screens, airports turned into waiting rooms for answers that never came. The plane had left Kuala Lumpur for Beijing, its route routine, its pilots seasoned, its systems modern. Every signal said normal, until the sky said otherwise. Somewhere over the ocean, at cruising altitude, everything familiar, data, speech, heartbeats, stopped. And in that brief interval between known and gone, a new kind of mystery was born. The news broke before dawn. CNN anchors spoke with wide eyes, voices trembling between disbelief and professionalism. A Malaysia Airlines flight has vanished from radar, they said. We have no confirmation yet of what happened. No one wanted to use the word crash. Not yet. The word vanished felt safer and somehow eerier. In Malaysia, the control tower replayed the last exchanges again and again, listening for anomalies. A tremor in the pilot's voice, a sound behind the static, any clue hidden in the space between words. But there was none. The transcript was clean, the weather was clear, the instruments were fine. So how do you lose a Boeing 777 in calm skies without a single mayday? Some said the sea had taken it, that a sudden explosion or decompression had plunged the aircraft into the deep before anyone could react. Others whispered something stranger, that it had flown into another corridor of existence, a Bermuda of the East, a silent rift in the map where metal and memory dissolved together. At 01:21, just 2 minutes after that last farewell, MH370's transponder went dark. Its symbol vanished from civilian radar. But what few people knew then was that military radar still sweeping the night caught something else. A turn. A deliberate smooth arc westward, away from its path to Beijing, away from all expectation. Someone was still flying the plane, for another 6 hours. Fact reports later confirmed that data, the handshakes they called them, 7 electronic pings, exchanged between the aircraft system and a satellite orbiting 22,000 miles above the Earth, each one weaker than the last, until the final at 08:19 a.m., a quiet farewell to the world below. By the time the first search planes rose from the tarmac, the jet had been gone for more than 8 hours, its fuel long exhausted, its last known position nowhere near where it should have been. Families arrived at the airport clutching photographs and hope. Volunteers carried banners printed with faces smiling, ordinary, suspended in time. One mother whispered to the cameras, "He texted me before boarding. He said he'd call me from Beijing." She looked up toward the sky, cloudless, endless, and asked, "Where did they go?" The official word was missing, the unofficial one was impossible. Folklore began to breathe where facts ran out. Fishermen along the Thai coast claimed to see lights moving low above the water that night, too large for a plane, too slow for a star. Others said their radios crackled with voices indecipherable, as if something was whispering through frequencies that weren't supposed to speak. In the Andaman Islands, a sailor told of a white shape gliding silently across the moonlight, no sound, no engines, before it vanished behind the clouds. In every bar and dockside cafe, stories multiplied like waves. But among investigators, the language was colder. ACR's transmission terminated at 01:07, one report stated. Transponder deactivated at 01:21. Last primary radar contact, 02:22. And then the list of absences: no wreckage, no distress beacon, no confirmed crash site. The ocean offered nothing but silence. Weeks later, experts argued live on TV. Some swore by the ghost flight theory that a fire or depressurization had killed everyone on board, and the aircraft flew on autopilot until it ran out of fuel. Others accused the captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, of a calculated act, a long suicide written across the sky. And still others whispered that someone had taken control, that MH370 had been hijacked, diverted, hidden. But all those voices shared one thing: uncertainty. Each explanation fell apart against the enormity of what wasn't there. In the months that followed, the sea gave up only fragments. A flaperon on Reunion Island, part of a wing in Mozambique, a cabin panel washed onto a Tanzanian shore. The ocean spoke in broken syllables, pieces of a sentence that never finished. The folklore, however, evolved into something else, into warning, into prayer. In Malaysian villages, old fishermen began to leave small offerings before setting out at night: bits of bread, a coin, a match, tokens for the lost souls still wandering above the sea. They said the sky over the straits had changed since 2014, that on certain nights, if the air is still and the moon is thin, you can hear the hum of engines that aren't there, fading, returning, fading again. A restless echo that refuses to die. The official investigation called it the greatest mystery in modern aviation. But to those who still wait, it is not history, it is a wound that never closed. When you stare into that stretch of blue on the map between Malaysia and Madagascar, it seems endless. But if you listen long enough, you might hear the ghosts of signals pulsing like faint heartbeats trapped somewhere between cloud and current. Maybe the ocean knows, maybe the sky remembers, maybe this story was never meant to end where we think it did. Before we continue, leave a comment where you're listening from. Tell us if you remember where you were the day the sky went silent. Because tonight we reopen a case without a body, a signal, or a grave, and somewhere out there, 239 names still whisper through the static. March 7, 2014. Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Humid, sleepless, fluorescent light washing the glass and chrome. The departure board flickered faintly. MH370 Beijing on time. No one knew that line of text would become an epitaph. It was a Friday night. The air thick with the sound of luggage wheels, the soft hum of air conditioners, the low murmur of travelers halfway between destinations and dreams. The Boeing 777-200ER stood on the tarmac, its white fuselage gleaming under sodium lights, its engines breathing in quiet rhythm. Inside, 239 passengers were boarding a flight that should have lasted 6 hours and vanished only in memory. Instead, it would vanish in truth. The captain, Zahari Ahmad Shah, moved with calm precision, a veteran with over 18,000 flight hours known for his patience and composure. He greeted the crew with small nods, brief smiles. To most, he was ordinary, meticulous, quiet, deeply devoted to the mechanics of flight. His co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid was younger still, new to the captain's chair, still carried the eager composure of someone who hadn't yet lost his awe for the sky. It was supposed to be his last supervised flight before full certification. A night to remember. Outside, the tropical night clung to the runway like warm breath. It was 11:30 p.m. when ground crew began their final checks. Cargo loaded, cabin sealed, fuel tanks full 49-100 kilograms, enough to reach Beijing with reserves to spare. The passengers were a mosaic of humanity: engineers, students, artists, couples, families. Among them, a group of Chinese calligraphy scholars returning from a cultural event, 2 infants barely a year old, and a delegation of 12 from Freescale Semiconductor bound for Beijing on business. They would later become ghost names in digital archives, frozen forever between departed and arrived. At 00:41 a.m., MH370 began its roll down runway 32R. The engines roared, the city lights blurred, and the aircraft lifted into the dense night. For 42 minutes, it followed its assigned corridor airway route M765, heading northeast toward Vietnam. Routine communications, normal altitude 35,000 feet. Then at 01:19 a.m., the radio crackled. "Good night, Malaysian 370. The voice was calm, the phrase standard. But it would be the last sound anyone ever heard from Flight 370. 2 minutes later, the transponder blinked off. Civilian radar lost the plane. For a moment there was disbelief. Systems fail all the time, briefly. But this silence stretched too long. Controllers tried to raise the aircraft. No response. Other pilots in the region tuned their radios to the emergency frequency, nothing but static. Somewhere above the sea, the world's most reliable airliner had turned invisible. What followed in the next few hours would unravel the fragile illusion that modern technology could account for everything in the sky. At 01:30, air traffic control in Ho Chi Minh City expected MH370 to cross into Vietnamese airspace. No contact. At 01:38, they tried again. Silence. By 02:03, Vietnam issued a request for clarification to Malaysia, but Malaysia's radar still showed the aircraft on course, or so they thought. The truth would take days to surface. MH370 had already turned back, carving a silent arc across the Malay Peninsula, flying into the dark where no one was looking. Military radar later traced the path northwest over Penang, then out across the Andaman Sea, a journey of deliberate navigation. No erratic maneuvers, no signs of distress. Whoever was in control knew how to fly. And then around 02:22, it vanished again, this time for good. The next morning, daylight revealed nothing. No wreckage, no signal, no floating debris. Search teams combed the South China Sea, convinced it must have gone down somewhere near its last known civilian coordinates. Ships, planes, satellites, all looking in the wrong ocean. At 6:30 a.m., relatives waiting in Beijing saw the arrival board flicker, delayed, then contact lost, then nothing. Inside the airport's sterile halls, people cried into their phones, stared at the empty space where flight numbers once glowed. The air grew heavier with each unanswered question. In Kuala Lumpur, the airline's emergency command center began calling lists confirming names. The government convened its crisis room first, disbelief, then protocol, then panic. The phrase missing aircraft was repeated like a spell. By noon, the world knew. A Boeing 777, a plane so large it could swallow a bus whole, had simply ceased to exist. Fact layer. At 02:25 a.m., 6 minutes after military radar lost the plane, a satellite operated by Inmarsat picked up an automatic handshake from MH370's data system, a signal confirming it was still airborne. That handshake would repeat 6 more times over the next 6 hours, each time drifting farther south until the last pulse faded over the southern Indian Ocean. The world would spend years trying to follow that ghost trail, a breadcrumb path made of radio echoes and mathematics. Folklore layer fishermen near the coast of Kelantan said they saw a burning trail across the sky that night, long silent, vanishing into the water without a sound. A farmer claimed he heard a roar so loud it shook his fields, then nothing. In Myanmar, villagers swore they saw a silver light moving low, slower than a plane, almost as if it were searching for something. Later skeptics dismissed these stories. Atmospheric illusions, confusion, the mind's way of giving shape to uncertainty. But in every mystery, folklore moves faster than evidence. The search that followed would become the largest in aviation history. Dozens of nations joined Australia, China, the United States, India, Indonesia. Ships crisscrossed the ocean, sonar arrays dragging through depths 4 miles deep. Satellites scanned patterns in wave drift and light reflection. And still nothing. In those early days, theories multiplied like shadows. A hijacking, a fire, a decompression, a rogue pilot. Each theory birthed another, feeding the hunger for reason in a story built on silence. But the silence persisted, vast, oceanic, almost alive. Investigators reconstructed the final minutes again and again, plotting coordinates, fuel estimates, autopilot modes. Every version ended the same way, a slow descent into the unknown. They called it the seventh arc, the invisible curve, where the final satellite ping suggested the aircraft fell. A digital tombstone on an ocean no one could reach. In the months that followed, oceanographers mapped drift models, tracing where debris might surface. On the other side of the world, beachcombers in Madagascar and Réunion began to find fragments, flaperons, fuselage panels, interior cabin pieces, pale bones of a machine that once breathed fire. Each discovery confirmed what the families feared, and yet proved nothing at all. Malaysia's official report would later declare, "The aircraft's disappearance cannot be determined with certainty. Such language, sterile, deliberate, conceals a deeper horror. A modern jet tracked by satellites and radar, flown by trained men, vanished in a time when we can see Mars in high definition, and no one could say where it went." Even now, pilots speak of MH370 in hushed tones, like sailors mentioning a cursed ship, a warning, a parable. Because if it could happen to them, it could happen again. And so the map remains scarred, a blank space west of Australia, marked only by coordinates and sorrow. In aviation museums, there's no exhibit for MH370, no wingtip, no seat, no black box. Just a line in the air leading nowhere. At night, when satellite engineers review the old data, some say they still feel uneasy looking at the final ping. The numbers seem ordinary: signal strength, time, delay, burst, frequency, offset, but when you stare long enough, it feels like something is still out there whispering through static. Fact becomes myth. Myth becomes warning. And the boundary between sky and sea, between the known and the lost, dissolves once more. March 2014. The night the sky went silent. The beginning of the longest search in history. And the oldest question mankind ever asks. The dark, where did they go? In the days that followed the vanishing, the word missing began to lose its meaning. Airlines had lost planes before: crashes, collisions, explosions, but none had simply departed and failed to arrive. It was, as the early communiques phrased it, a singular disappearance. The first official bulletin from Malaysia Airlines arrived on March 8, 2014 at 7:24 a.m. Contact lost with Flight MH370 at 0240 local time. Search and rescue operations initiated. In that moment, the bureaucratic machinery of crisis began to grind into motion. At the Rescue Coordination Center in Putrajaya, men in pressed uniforms leaned over maps lit by cold fluorescent light. Phones rang in overlapping languages: English, Malay, Mandarin, Vietnamese. Coordinates were written, erased, written again. By noon, vessels from Malaysia, Vietnam, and the Philippines had fanned out across the South China Sea. The first search grids were drawn, rectangles of blue ink on transparent overlays, each one labeled with latitude and longitude, each one already obsolete by the hour. At 14:30, a naval pilot reported what appeared to be floating debris. It was a fishing buoy. At 16:45, radar operators detected a possible return, a blip south of Tho Chu Island. It was an atmospheric echo. By nightfall, the entire sea was haunted by false sightings. In the press rooms of Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, journalists gathered like moths around the glow of screens. Plane vanished without trace. Families await word. No wreckage found. Each headline printed in black and white only deepened the gray of uncertainty. March 9th. The Malaysian Prime Minister appeared before cameras flanked by defense officials. Behind him, a map, Malaysia, the Gulf of Thailand, the faint outline of Vietnam. Our nation faces an unprecedented situation. All available assets are being deployed. The phrase unprecedented situation would echo for years. In Washington, intelligence analysts began cross-checking satellite imagery, radar data, and electronic intercepts. The Americans had their own word for it: mysterious occurrence. The absence of distress calls troubled them. No Mayday, no ELT beacon, one report noted. Loss of transponder consistent with manual deactivation. Manual, it implied intent. But whose? The Australians joined the search on March 10th. The Chinese Navy dispatched 5 ships. The United States sent the destroyer USS Pinckney and a P-8 Poseidon aircraft. For the first time since the Cold War, vessels from rival nations sailed side by side, drawn together not by politics but by a vacuum in the sky. Meanwhile, at the Kuala Lumpur Command Center, investigators replayed the last recorded transmission. That calm, almost gentle voice. "Good night, Malaysian 370. Experts from Boeing confirmed the flight systems would continue broadcasting through ARS unless manually disabled. The line went silent at 0107, 14 minutes before the final radio call. The official logbook described it in sterile precision. ACRs, last transmission 0107 MIT, scheduled transmission 0137 not received, transponder signal lost at 0121, radar contact terminated. In the margins, someone had penciled 2 words, fate unknown. The early hours of March 11th brought the first confession of error. Vietnam reported that their air defense radar had no trace of the aircraft crossing their airspace. Malaysia's Air Force then released new data. Primary radar returns showing the aircraft had turned back, crossed the peninsula, and headed west. The search area doubled, then tripled, then exploded into chaos. By March 13th, the South China Sea was empty of meaning. Search ships withdrew their decks littered with reports and coffee cups and exhaustion. The focus shifted to the Straits of Malacca, to the Andaman Sea. Every hour, new theories surfaced: mechanical failure hijacking electrical fire. Every hour, new denials followed. The records from those days read like fragments of a fever dream. 0345, unidentified signal detected. 0520, contact lost again. 0700, dawn patrol reports no sightings. The ocean kept its secret. March 15th. The Prime Minister appeared again, this time with new evidence. The satellite company Inmarsat had detected automatic handshakes from MH370's satellite data unit long after it vanished from radar. The aircraft, he said, had continued to fly for several hours. The news rippled through the press room like an electric current. If the plane had kept flying, where had it gone? Inmarsat's data suggested 2 possible corridors: north across Thailand, India toward Kazakhstan, south deep into the Indian Ocean toward Antarctica. Neither path offered comfort. At 10 Yozher that morning, an Australian oceanographer drew a line on a projection map, a faint arc sweeping across the Southern Ocean curving west of Perth. He called it the 7th Arc. It would become the ghost trail of MH370. Ships were redeployed to the new zone. The distances were immense: 200 to 500 kilometers of empty water waves 6 meters high, winds cold and unrelenting. Search aircraft flew in grids so vast the curvature of the earth swallowed the horizon. In the flight logs, the entries became monotonous, almost poetic. No sightings, heavy cloud, sea state 5, visibility poor, oil slick sample negative. On April 6th, a Chinese ship, Haixun 01, reported picking up acoustic pulses, possible pings, from an aircraft's black box. For a week, the world believed. By April 14th, hope collapsed again. The sounds were traced to marine life, not metal. The ocean mocked human instruments. When the first official interim report was released that summer, it carried the restrained tone of bureaucratic grief. The disappearance of MH370 remains unexplained. Search continues under international coordination. No names, no cause. Only coordinates, frequencies, and timestamps, relics of a story too large to fit on paper. By late 2015, fragments began to wash ashore: a flaperon on Réunion Island, an interior panel in Mozambique, a cabin wall on Madagascar. Each one catalogued, photographed, shipped to Kuala Lumpur. Each one carrying the same designation, confirmed to be from 9M MRO. Yet the core of the plane, the fuselage, the engines, the black boxes remained missing. The official phrasing evolved: probable loss at sea, final location unknown, investigation ongoing. Behind closed doors, investigators argued. Some insisted on mechanical failure, a catastrophic event disabling communication, rendering the crew unconscious. Others pointed to the deliberate path change, a pilot's hand on the yoke. Still others whispered of external interference, hijack, cyber intrusion, state involvement. Each theory reflected not certainty, but desperation. In the archives of the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, One memorandum bears a faint coffee ring and a sentence underlined twice. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. By 2016, the operation had scanned over 120,000 square kilometers of seabed. They found shipwrecks, old whalers, lost freighters, forgotten relics, but not a trace of MH370. In January 2017, the search was suspended. The closing report read, "Despite exhaustive efforts, no further evidence has been located. The final resting place of MH370 remains unknown." Unknown, a word both official and unbearable. When the Malaysian final report was released in July 2018, its conclusion was as hollow as the sky it tried to explain. The team is unable to determine the real cause of the disappearance. The possibility of intervention by a third party cannot be excluded. The document ended there. No closure, no finality, only the weight of formality. Somewhere between satellite coordinates and human grief, the truth had dissolved. The files remain 1,500 pages of data transcripts, drift, analyses, cockpit histories, all preserved, all inconclusive. And so the record stands a monument of absence. The cold diction of officialdom cannot mask its ghostly undertone, a great machine, 1,000 tons of precision, 100 hearts beating in unison gone, a fate unknown. When archivists read the report aloud years later, their voices faltered at the same line. The aircraft's final position cannot be determined with certainty. The phrasing is perfect, sterile, bloodless, yet aching with everything unsaid. Between those words lies the true shape of MH370, a hole in the modern world, a blank page in the age of satellites. And though the documents end, the data persists, faint, pulsing, unresolved. A single unanswered ping still lingers in the record, the ghost heartbeat of a vanished sky. In every great disappearance there comes a second vanishing, the moment when the living fade into silence, waiting for the dead to speak. It began in airports, sterile, bright, humming with artificial light. But as the days stretched into weeks, something darker crept in. The waiting rooms became shrines. Families stopped speaking in the tense logic of search updates and began whispering in the language of omens. At Kuala Lumpur International, the chairs near Gate 14 stayed occupied long after the flight was declared missing. Mothers clutched phones that no longer rang. Fathers held crumpled boarding passes, their edges worn soft. Some left offerings, bottles of water, bits of candy, folded paper cranes. Others whispered names as if the sound might draw the vanished back through the static. One woman was seen every morning before sunrise. She placed a white flower on the floor beneath the flight schedule screen, always at the same spot, always facing the same direction. She told a reporter, "They're not gone. They're waiting to land somewhere the sun hasn't reached yet." The folklore of flight, long buried beneath aviation's steel and math, began to breathe again. In the weeks after MH370 disappeared, old seafarers' tales resurfaced, stories that had once belonged to the ocean. Sailors in the Straits of Malacca spoke of a place they called Laut Senyap, the Silent Sea. A stretch of water said to swallow sound itself. Ships passing through it, they claimed, often lost radio contact. Compasses spun, voices on deck grew muffled. The sky above it seemed to pulse faintly like a living thing. Long ago the fishermen said an island stood there, now gone, drowned without a ripple. Its name erased from maps, its people forgotten. Some say the spirits of those drowned still wander the currents, mistaking the roar of jet engines for the voices of gods. And so when MH370 vanished into that same corridor of sea and sky, the old legends stirred. The island called them back, one elder told a Malaysian newspaper, his eyes rimmed with salt and smoke. The ocean remembers its own. But it wasn't just fishermen. Along the coastlines from Sumatra to Phuket, villagers claimed to see something, a light hovering low over the horizon, moving slow like a star that refused to set. For 3 nights the light appeared, then vanished into the clouds. A monk from Hat Yai recalled hearing a thunderless boom in the middle of prayer. The candles flickered. The temple bell swung once, though no wind blew. He said the sky afterward felt crowded, as if unseen travelers were passing overhead. To the modern ear, these were the ramblings of grief. But to the people who live between ocean and storm, superstition and survival are the same. In Beijing, where the families waited, folklore took on a quieter form. Dreams. Many reported the same one standing on a vast beach at night, watching planes descend silently into the water, their windows glowing, their passengers awake but unmoving. The tide rose, covered the planes, and the water went still. Psychologists called it collective trauma. The families called it visitation. There is a recording made in the 3rd week after the disappearance of a mother speaking to a voicemail inbox that could still receive messages. Her son had been on the flight. She said, "If you can hear this, tell me what the ocean looks like." When the reporter played it back later, there was a faint tone, not a human voice, not static, but something that pulsed, distant, rhythmic. In Kuala Lumpur, hotel rooms filled with relatives became altars, photographs taped to walls, candles in water glasses, the smell of incense and takeout noodles. A young woman from Penang said she felt her brother in the room one night, a sudden rush of cold air, the flicker of the bedside lamp. "He was saying goodbye," she whispered. Folklore spread faster than any press release. Some claimed their phones rang once, then cut to silence, displaying only the flight number. Others swore that days after the disappearance, their loved ones appeared online, a blinking green dot, a message seen but never written. In the archives of the Star One column ran a story that editors nearly pulled for fear of ridicule. It spoke of an airport worker who had been on duty the night of the flight. Around 3 a.m., long after MH370 vanished from radar, he said he heard the faint sound of engines above the terminal, not loud, but present, circling, as though the plane were still searching for a runway. He stepped outside. The sky was empty. But the sound lingered. Pilots later denied it was possible. No aircraft flew that route at that hour. Yet the man's logbook showed the entry 0314 sound overhead, duration 18 seconds. In Malaysia's coastal villages, rituals of appeasement began quietly. Fishermen tied ribbons of red cloth to the masts of their boats before heading out. The color, they said, would keep the ROH terbang, the flying spirits, from following them home. Priests burned paper effigies shaped like airplanes, sending smoke toward the clouds, pleading with whatever realm held the lost to let them rest. The Chinese diaspora revived an older tradition, Hunpo Zhaogui, calling the souls home. Families gathered by rivers at dusk, lighting paper lanterns shaped like wings. They floated downstream, carrying whispered names. Some lanterns sank instantly. Others drifted far out to sea, small orange hearts beating against the dark. News channels dismissed these rituals as emotional catharsis. But to those who watched the lanterns fade into night, it felt like speaking to the unreachable. Months later in Madagascar, a man walking the shoreline found a panel of composite material washed ashore, curved, smooth, pale as bone. When investigators arrived, he told them the ocean sent it back. It didn't want to keep it anymore. He refused to sell it, though officials offered money. Instead, he buried it near the village shrine, saying, "Let it sleep with the ancestors." In the absence of wreckage, imagination became the only territory left to explore. Some said the plane had crossed into a different dimension, a place parallel to ours, caught in a loop of sky and silence. Others compared it to the ghost ships of old, the Flying Dutchman of the 21st century, condemned to circle the world unseen. A retired air traffic controller once described a peculiar event in an interview years later. He was monitoring an unrelated flight months after MH370's disappearance, when a phantom signal appeared on his radar, a code that matched no active aircraft positioned near the southern arc. It blinked once, then vanished. He wrote it in his report, but no one followed up. He kept a copy of the screen capture. In faint green text, the letters read MRO, the final registration code of the missing Boeing. Scientists dismissed it as radar ghosting and electronic echo, but he never looked at the ocean the same way again. The farther time stretched, the more the case dissolved into myth. Children born after 2014 grew up hearing of a plane that flew into heaven and forgot to return. Artists painted it as a silver bird ascending into eternity. Fishermen told their sons never to whistle while crossing the Malacca Strait, lest the lost hear you and mistake your breath for wind. There's a place now in Malaysia where the jungle presses close to the sea, a small memorial built by families who could no longer wait for closure. No plaque, no government logo, only a circle of stones and a single inscription carved by hand for those who departed into the silence between stars. At night, candles are lit there. Locals say the flame never burns straight. It flickers sideways, as if bending towards something unseen, toward the horizon, toward the sky. Perhaps it's just the wind. Perhaps it's something else. And yet each year on March 8th, when the candles are relit, the air changes. The insects grow quiet, the sea darkens early. People claim to hear the same sound, a low hum, distant, rhythmic, like engines passing overhead. No one looks up. They simply bow their heads and whisper the only prayer left to them: return if you can, rest if you cannot. The ocean forgets nothing, but it remembers differently than we do. When MH370 slipped beneath its surface, or perhaps never touched it at all, it joined a lineage of vanishings that stretches across centuries. Each one separate, yet all vibrating with the same pulse, a machine or a vessel built by human certainty, swallowed by silence. The first debris from MH370 surfaced in July 2015, more than a year after the night the sky went still. On the island of Réunion in the Indian Ocean, a man walking the shore found a single wing fragment half buried in sand. Salt had eaten away its edges, but one serial number remained, 657 BB, confirmed part of the right flaperon of Boeing 9M MRO. The newspapers called it a ghost limb returning from the sea. That same summer, oceanographers plotted the fragment's drift path. Their computer models showed currents moving westward, looping around Madagascar. The flaperon's journey mirrored ancient trade winds once charted by lost galleons. One researcher murmured, it floated the same routes the Dutch ships took in the 1600s, the same currents that carried their bones. And so the story began to echo other disappearances, ones older, wrapped in fog and salt and the impossible. In 1945, 5 American torpedo bombers vanished over the Atlantic. The dispatch that followed called it a routine training mission, weather clear. They radioed once compasses acting strange. Minutes later, their formation dissolved into cloud. No wreckage was found. The Navy search plane sent to find them disappeared too. The report from that day bore the same line that would later define MH370 fate unknown. They called it Flight 19. And from that myth, an entire phrase was born, the Bermuda Triangle. But long before the Bermuda, before radar and radio and skyways, there were stories from the sea, stories that sound eerily modern. In 1872, a brigantine called the Mary Celeste was found drifting between Portugal and the Azores, sails full cargo intact, the galley still warm with half-eaten breakfast. No sign of struggle, no crew. The logbook's final entry ended abruptly, 8 a.m. Weather fair, course steady, all well. After that, nothing, just like MH370's calm final transmission. Good night. Just like every voice that disappears one sentence before the void. In the archives of oceanic records, these cases blur into one another, lines of data punctuated by absence. 1948, the Star Tiger and Star Ariel, both commercial airliners, vanished over the same Atlantic corridor within a year of each other. Weather fine, radios functioning. 1956, Pan Am Flight 7 vanished over the Pacific, debris scattered, but no explanation. 1962, the Flying Tiger Line cargo flight from Guam disappeared mid-air, wreckage never found. Each case written in the same dialect of bureaucracy and disbelief: contact lost, cause undetermined. And now in the 21st century, MH370 carried the pattern into the digital age, proving that even in a world wrapped in satellites, the old magic of disappearance endures. Investigators who pored over the satellite handshake data described it as a breadcrumb trail fading in reverse, each ping weaker, slower, like a heart-losing rhythm. The final arc, they said, was drawn not across the sea, but across mathematics itself, a curve of probabilities, a guess at eternity. The ocean floor beneath that arc remains one of the least mapped regions on Earth. It hides trenches deep as mountains, plains of silt untouched since the birth of the planet. Down there, even sonar grows uncertain. Metallic echoes fold into the voices of whales. Australian surveyors who led the deep-sea search reported strange returns, sonar images that seemed to show shapes too symmetrical to be natural, too quiet to be explained. One entry in their log read simply, "Structure resembling fuselage shadowed but vanishes on second pass." Nothing definitive, always inconclusive, always gone when approached. And yet among the crews, superstition grew. They called the search corridor the sleep zone. They spoke of hearing faint metallic knocks through the hull when the sonar buoys deployed. Like something answering, one diver said. He laughed afterward too loudly, as if to chase the thought away. Motif repeats itself across time: vanishing craft, unbroken calm, instruments that fail where logic should prevail. Even in war where chaos reigns, there are silences that feel unnatural. In 1943, a Japanese submarine vanished south of Java without distress call. In 1978, a Cessna pilot named Frederick Valentich reported an unidentified craft hovering above him over Bass Strait, Australia. His final transmission: "It's not an aircraft." Then radio silence. His plane was never found. The coordinates of Valentich's last transmission lie less than 600 miles from the projected southern arc of MH370. Two disappearances separated by 40 years, united by geography, by the same magnetic line that runs like an invisible fault beneath the Earth's skin. There are those who study these patterns, not scientists, but archivists of the uncanny. They call it the Great Line of Silence, a diagonal drawn from Bermuda to the South Indian Ocean, cutting through centuries of vanishing ships and aircraft. No one admits it officially, but the data clusters are real. Every age leaves its ghosts in the same corridors of sky and sea. In the declassified files of the British Admiralty, there's mention of a 19th century survey expedition that recorded compass deviations in the same region where MH370 is believed to have gone down. They described an invisible field that turns north into west. Modern physicists call it magnetic anomaly. Sailors called it the breath of the deep. The deeper one looks into the records, the less they seem like accidents, more like a rhythm, a recurring pull, as though the Earth itself swallows what it chooses. And maybe that's why each new disappearance awakens the old ones. When the Flaperon washed ashore on Réunion, locals brought it to their church before handing it to authorities. The priest sprinkled it with salt water and whispered the same prayer once used for shipwreck victims. The ocean, he said, must be thanked when it returns what it borrowed. Even science bends toward ritual at the edges of comprehension. The motif endures not because it is proven, but because it feels true. The same words recur across centuries. Weather clear, crew experienced, last contact normal. A litany of order preceding chaos. In the digital archives, the timeline of MH370 ends with its final ping, 08:19 a.m. UTC, but another file sits beside it, a smaller one less publicized. It records a radar ghost detected over the Indian Ocean 8 days later, a single blip that appeared for 27 seconds. The system tagged it as unidentified possible atmospheric reflection. Its projected altitude 35,000 feet. Its signature frequency identical to Boeing 777 transponder pulse width. The technicians dismissed it. The file was labeled artifact. The timestamp remains. For those who have searched the oceans long enough, these echoes feel less like accidents than invitations, whispers from some continuum where time folds and what vanishes in one century resurfaces in another. Think of the lost British submarine HMS Thetis in 1939, found 4 decades later upright on the seabed, lights still faintly visible through the rust. Or the Soviet K-129, found in 1974 by a CIA vessel built just to retrieve it. The sea gives, then takes, then gives again, always on its own schedule. Perhaps someday MH370 will rise too, a coral-covered skeleton emerging from the deep carrying answers no one alive remains to question. Or perhaps it will never be found at all, joining the unseen fleet of things the world has misplaced. When investigators gathered at Canberra in 2018 to close the final report, one senior official, a man who'd spent half his life studying wrecks, stood before the map and traced his finger along the 7th arc. "This isn't the first," he said quietly, "and it won't be the last." Because the story of MH370 is not about one plane. It is about the fragility of knowledge, the persistence of unknowing. It is about how even now, in an age of satellite eyes and digital gods, there are still coordinates where the human voice cannot reach. Some call it malfunction, others mystery. But the records, the folklore, and the silence all point to one truth: there are places in this world where history repeats its vanishings like a heartbeat. And if you listen closely enough, deep in the static between the last signal and the next, you might still hear it pulsing. The rhythm of the lost, the echo of the disappeared. By the 4th year of the search, something had begun to unravel, not beneath the sea, but within the story itself. Too many versions, too many hands rewriting the same night. The official timeline no longer matched the human one. Investigators from Malaysia, Australia, and the United States convened in sterile rooms flooded with fluorescent light tables covered in documents, diagrams, and coffee-stained maps. They spoke in the language of precision, altitude, ping delay, fuel range, but the silences between their words were louder than the facts. There were discrepancies, small at first, then multiplying like cracks in glass. The flight simulator found in Captain Zahari Ahmed Shah's home, for instance. Police claimed it contained a deleted route eerily similar to the one MH370 had taken, a simulated flight ending deep in the southern Indian Ocean. But the data was fragmented, the route incomplete. Deleted files recovered, but timestamps missing. The report said simulations consistent with long-range flight profile. Yet days later, another statement contradicted it. No direct correlation to the actual flight path. Someone had either erased something or invented something to erase. Within the sealed annexes of the investigation, witnesses spoke under oath. An engineer from Malaysia Airlines recalled seeing the maintenance logs for 9 MRO days before the flight, a minor electrical issue in the SATCOM system since resolved. But when those records were later released to the public, that line was gone. No mention of malfunction, no acknowledgement of correction. The engineer was later reassigned. And the cargo manifest, another ghost document. For months it remained classified. When finally released, the numbers didn't add up. A shipment listed as lithium batteries 453 kilograms was entered twice with 2 different codes. The batteries were later said to have been securely packed, unlikely to ignite. Yet in an internal memo, one never meant for publication, a customs officer wrote, "Item 88 to 4735 not verified by inspection. Content sealed by private contractor." No name of contractor, no country of origin. The folklore layer began to mirror the investigation's unease. Online forums, digital campfires filled with whispers of ghost cargo, classified transport, shadow manifest. Some claimed the batteries were a cover for something else, prototype microchips or defense hardware en route to Beijing. Others spoke of a silent passenger and agent under false name. Officially, the passenger list showed no anomalies, but 2 seats had been booked under duplicate passport numbers. When journalists pressed for details, the airline called it clerical redundancy. The clerical ghosts kept multiplying. In early 2018, after the official search ended, a French journalist named Florence de Changey published excerpts from leaked correspondence between satellite analysts. One line stood out: ping 70019Z, secondary burst detected, classified under anomaly. No such secondary burst appeared in the released dataset. Inmarsat denied its existence. Yet in the internal version of the log obtained through an anonymous source, there was indeed a brief signature lasting 0.7 seconds at a frequency consistent with emergency transmission. It vanished before acknowledgement. The last sound perhaps of MH370, or an echo, or a fabrication. The more one studies the official record, the more it resembles a palimpsest, layers of truth written over, scrubbed clean, rewritten again. The Australian search logs list acoustic detections at coordinates 25 DGS 101 DGE, the same coordinates, where 2 weeks later, Ocean Shield's underwater drone reported mechanical interference. When those logs were later digitized, the page containing that entry was missing. An internal clerk later admitted anonymously that several early sonar maps were lost in file transfer. When asked for backups, the system returned a single message: corrupt archive. Lost, corrupt, misfiled, words that sound almost supernatural when describing a billion-dollar investigation. Even among the families, contradictions deepened. A relative in Beijing claimed to have received a phone call from her husband's number weeks after the disappearance. The line connected for 12 seconds, filled with static. The phone company confirmed a phantom ring, no outgoing or incoming record. She wasn't the only one. At least 10 families reported similar calls in the days following March 8th. Some rang once, then ended. Others showed up as active connections with no sound at all. Engineers explained it as network lag, unreturned signals bouncing through dormant servers. But folklore once again filled the gaps. In many Asian traditions, it is said that the recently dead attempt to contact loved ones through broken devices, flickering screens, dial tones without origin. The more modern the world became, the more ancient its ghosts sounded. A security guard at the Kuala Lumpur radar facility later revealed in an off-record conversation that one of the radar tapes from that night, the original reel, was physically damaged. The moment MH370's blip disappeared, the tape stuttered a half-second pause and then resumed with a faint line drawn backward against time. He had kept a still photo of it before the reel was archived. When shown to experts, they dismissed it as interference. But the guard, an old man by the time he spoke, said quietly, "It looked like the plane turned back toward us." Then there was the diary. Among the items collected from Captain Zahari's home was a small leather-bound journal dated sporadically. Most pages contained notes on weather fuel and maintenance, mundane entries from a meticulous mind. But the last page, dated 2 weeks before the flight, contained a single sentence written in precise block letters. "Every flight ends somewhere, even if we can't see it." The handwriting was verified as his. The page was excluded from the final public release. One investigator name withheld from the official roster later said, "There are pages of that journal we were never allowed to read." And yet the mystery of omission doesn't end in paper. The flaperon recovered from Réunion, the one confirmed to belong to MH370, underwent forensic analysis in France. The initial report mentioned erosion patterns inconsistent with long-term ocean exposure. The final version of that report deleted the sentence entirely. Something about the sea's timeline didn't match the plane's. By now, the official narrative resembled a puzzle missing its corners. Every fragment found raised more questions than it answered. The aircraft's wing component found in Mozambique showed barnacle growth consistent with months, not years at sea. The seat cushion recovered from Madagascar bore no salt residue at all. How could an object drift thousands of kilometers through salt water without salt? When confronted with the inconsistencies, the investigative team blamed contamination during recovery. But one forensic expert quietly withdrew his name from the report, citing methodological disagreement. And what of the black boxes, the very heart of every aircraft's truth? They were designed to emit a locator ping for 30 days after submersion. Dozens of ships scanned the ocean's heart during that time. Not one heard the sound. Some argued the batteries had expired early. Others whispered that the boxes had never entered the sea at all. There exists in the closed annex of the Australian Transport Bureau a file. The ocean has returned to stillness. But the silence it left behind still moves. Years have passed, and yet the coordinates remain open, not as a place, but as an ache. 6° south of Java, 8° north of Certainty. The water there seems calm, ordinary. But ask the crews who sail through it at night, they'll tell you something different. They'll say their radios hum faintly, their instruments drift, their sleep fills with whispers. They call it the corridor of the lost. After the reports ended, after the cameras packed up, a smaller kind of search began, not in the sea, but in the human mind. Every investigator, every family, every witness still carries a piece of the void. Each tries to fill it with something: logic, prayer, denial, data, dreams. But the shape of MH370 refuses to close. It remains open, endless, like the horizon itself. In Malaysia, the official archive is sealed in a gray government building. The files rest on metal shelves under fluorescent light. On the spine of one binder, a single label, Final Report Volume 1. But open it, and you will find no ending. Only the same words repeated through hundreds of pages, unable to determine. The truth somewhere inside was swallowed whole. Some of the investigators still talk off record. One described a file that was quietly removed from the public release, a set of satellite bursts recorded days after the official timeline ended. Probably noise, they said. But his voice trembled when he added, the pattern was identical. Another spoke of the cockpit voice recorder logs, or what little survived. The last 2 minutes of conversation, the moment before silence. He said the audio was strangely clean. Too clean. No static, he whispered. Like someone had edited out the world. The families, too, keep their own archives, private museums of what absence leaves behind. Airline tags, boarding stubs, toys, bracelets, photographs with fading ink. One mother keeps her son's voicemail saved on 3 devices, afraid technology will forget faster than she can bear. Another still sends birthday messages to an account that never replies. And yet there are patterns, coincidences that feel rehearsed by something older than chance. A fisherman near Sumatra claims he once caught a small metallic panel tangled in his net. When he reached to free it, it slipped away as if pulled from below. The current that night ran west toward the empty blue. He doesn't fish at night anymore. Further south, an Australian oceanographer rechecked drift simulations from 2014. He noticed something uncanny. The time intervals between Inmarsat's satellite handshakes form a near-perfect harmonic sequence, the same ratios used in sound waves. It's probably coincidence, he said. But then he added almost to himself. Or maybe it was never a signal at all. Maybe it was a heartbeat. The motif repeats: silence that moves, data that breathes, instruments that whisper. Sometimes late at night, air traffic controllers who work the case gather in quiet bars and speak in the language only they understand: altitudes, headings, bursts, offsets. Their voices soften when they reach 0121. They still call it the minute that disappeared. And yet the world keeps trying to explain what refuses to be explained. Documentaries replay the same radar arcs. Scientists release new drift models. Private companies offer to search again. No success, no fee. Each expedition returns with new scans, new sonar images, new absence. The sea remains polite but firm. Not yet. Meanwhile, the folklore that began in grief has matured into legend. In fishing villages along the Andaman coast, people now speak of the white bird of the south. They say it still crosses the horizon once a year, gliding low, its lights dim, its engines faint as breathing. Children are told to bow when they hear it, or it will take their names with it. One elder claims he saw it himself, a shape of silver passing through fog. No sound, he said, just a shadow, and then stars. In the highlands of Réunion, near where the Flaperon washed ashore, locals built a small stone altar. They leave seashells, candles, and folded slips of paper, coordinates, prayers, unanswered questions. A sign above it reads, "To the ones who flew into silence." Every March 8th, at the moment of the last known transmission, people around the world pause, sometimes knowingly, sometimes by coincidence, and look up. The sky for that instant feels heavy. And if you listen, if you truly hold still, you might hear it, that faint hum, a low tremor beneath the wind. Some say it's memory. Some say it's the sky remembering its debt. Maybe the greatest mystery of MH370 is not where it went, but why the human mind cannot let it go. Perhaps the void is no longer out there. Perhaps it has moved inside us. Every unanswered call, every echo between satellites, every dream of falling without end, all orbiting in the dark, waiting for acknowledgement. Years later, when the case was officially archived as unsolved, a line was added to the digital record. Not a statement, just a timestamp file, accessed 004103. The exact minute the plane left the ground. No one knows who opened it. There's a story, unverified, perhaps apocryphal, of a signal detected in 2019 by amateur radio operators in Western Australia. It was a narrowband transmission on an obsolete frequency pulsing every 38 seconds. When converted to audio, it produced a low, steady rhythm, then a pause, then 3 words: "Good night." Experts dismissed it as interference, a prank atmospheric noise. But for those who heard the recording firsthand, it didn't sound like static. It sounded like someone breathing through distance. The ocean, they say, never gives back what it takes, only echoes. And maybe that's all MH370 ever was, meant to become a mirror held up to our certainty, reminding us how fragile knowledge truly is. Because if a jet that size can vanish without trace, what else waits to be lost? What other signals are already drifting past us unheard? And what if somewhere right now another voice is whispering into the static, waiting for someone to answer? The sky has gone quiet again. But silence, once broken, never really heals. It lingers, it hums, it remembers. Maybe the story of MH370 was never about an airplane at all. Maybe it was about us, about the illusion that we are ever truly connected. And maybe the last thing the crew saw was dawn rising over the ocean, a thin red line on the horizon, the world turning gold one final time. Maybe they thought they were still on course. Maybe they still are. The signal fades, the sea closes, the sky exhales. And somewhere beyond every coordinate and every archive, 239 names still whisper through the static, waiting to land.